Well, happy Wednesday to all of you good folks. This is Faith Chat from Faith Lutheran Church in Yuma, Arizona. And it's just good to be with you. Trust that all of you are healthy and well and doing well. As I announced last week, I'm on the mend from my battle with vertigo. Not 100% yet, but getting closer all the time. And trust that those of you that are struggling with some health issues, that you're on the mend as well, so that we can be prepared to be God's church in this upcoming time. If you've been following our themes now, our worship themes and sermon themes during the summer, you see that we've been focusing on redeveloping and reconnecting our relationship with God. It would seem to be that that's not something that one would have to do in the church, but sometimes you have to take a look at that relationship and understand it in a new and a more creative way. So we have been looking at themes now that help us to take a look at what is going to happen for our church to be transformed into the church in the future, the one that is going to be prosperous and outreaching and welcoming to the community. So the themes that we have been looking at are developing, I said, this relationship, not focusing so much on religious activities, but on developing a closer relationship with God, and how is God calling us to look at our future. What we are seeing is that for us to be transformative in the future, we're going to have to be a welcoming community of a divergent of people. We're going to have to be an outreaching community, one that is willing to step into areas that maybe we haven't in the past, and that we're also going to have to be a community that crosses boundaries that we have maybe not done in the past. And that when we do this, we begin to move in the direction like the earliest church did. They are a model for us. Ever since Pentecost now, we've looked at this model. And the Bible is clear when it looks at the words of this early church, is that when you reach outside of your boundaries, when you get outside of your comfort zone, when you are welcoming the stranger, when you are including others, when the table gets expanded and more welcoming, then you grow. That's the model that succeeded for them. It's the model that we're going to try to incorporate for us. And as we look at the Bible, particularly the gospel, we are focusing on the words of Jesus, not the words about Jesus. Now, when we get to going back in the fall, trusting that we'll be back together again, uncertain of that time, but trusting that it will be soon, we're going to be having Bible study classes here in our church. And what we want to do in our Bible study is that we want to ground all of our decisions and our makings in good biblical foundation. And when I say looking at the words of Jesus rather than the words about Jesus, what I'm suggesting is that there are many words that are valuable in the scriptures, but they are commentary on what Jesus said. Foundational to what we want to do is to look at the words of Jesus. That would be the thing that needs to be our priority and will help guide us. For instance, our gospel lesson for this week's sermon was taken from Matthew chapter 9, starting in verses 9 through 13. If you look in the scriptures, you see that this was Jesus calling Matthew now to be a disciple. And as we look at the scriptures, we see that Matthew was a tax collector. Now, we've talked about this before. Tax collector was way out of the circle of the religious community at that time. In fact, the tax collector was considered to be one of the lowest characters within the religious community. In fact, the reference was to sinners and tax collectors. They were in the same category. A tax collector was a Jew who worked for the occupying army to collect taxes from fellow Jews to support the Roman government. In the people's eyes, this kind of person was a traitor. A traitor. This is the lowest denominator. Now, if Jesus was running a Messiah campaign that would be similar to a political campaign today, he would have steered clear of tax collectors, right? Especially when he wants to get lots of votes. But look at this now. Look at Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 9. He calls a tax collector. And immediately the Pharisees and the scribes jump on him. Jump on the other disciples and say, what's wrong with your leader here? He's inviting people to have dinner to be part of that are sinners and tax collectors. And Jesus' response to this is poignant and clear. Like a physician dealing with your physical ailment. I've come for the sick, not for the healthy. I've come for the lost, not those that are found. He now becomes more inclusive. Do you see that? You see how important that is in terms of the growth of the church? Our inclusiveness, our willing to think outside of the boundaries of our own comfort zone. So this example now leads into the rest of the sermon that I want to just give some highlights from Sunday. I entitled it Irregular Verbs. Now, I want to say that as a sermon preparer, as a pastor for many, many years, I try to come up with a kind of a hook that people will remember after they've heard the message, that's something that will stick with them 2 or 3 days later that they might talk about it. So I was saying and suggesting that we are irregular verbs. And I looked at, in all languages, the form of the verb to be, which speaks to our very essence and existence. The verb to be always talks about what it means to be rather than to act. The very being of something. And the verb to be says I am, you are, he, she, or it is. It speaks to this existence, and this verb is not constant. Like most verbs are conjugated in a constant way, it is irregular. And I'm using this notion now of irregular verb speaking to our existence in terms of grammar, also now in terms of our spiritual life. I think that we were created to be irregular verbs. That we're not all the same. That the gospel tells us over and over again that you're unique and special. At our baptism, we say to them, there is no one like you. Your name is written in heaven. Right? We are a diversity of people. And that is recognized and affirmed in terms of the development of the church. So, now that we understand this uniqueness that we have, we recognize that we live in a world that squeezes us. I call it the squeeze play. That tries to put us in categories. Categories of race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it is. The gospel, I think, comes and speaks and says all of that is welcome. All of that is welcome. And there is a blindness to see only groups, but not to see individuals. And this isn't biblical, this blindness. And it certainly isn't Christian. And it's wrong, because we are irregular verbs. You know, just yesterday now, we celebrated in our country the 100th anniversary of women being able to vote in the United States. Is that not a remarkable fact? That of all the years of our existence now, it was only in 1920 that women were able to vote. Now we're coming up in a season where we're going to be making important decisions around our votes. The transformation in terms of our own culture and recognizing the inclusiveness that is so necessary. The church should be way ahead of this, right? We should be out in front, leading the society toward recognizing that the circle is expanded, that there is room for all of the irregular verbs. Organized religion in itself many times is structured to squeeze us into positions and into places. This, I think, becomes an obstacle for new people wanting to come to the church. They see religion as restrictive. I told the story about The man that many years ago I invited to come to my church, and he said, "Well, Pastor, I'm going to have to turn you down because I don't believe in organized religion." And I quipped back to him. I said, "Well, then you ought to come to our church because we're not very organized." And I didn't say that from a standpoint of trying to be flippant. I tried to say to it that our organization is not the key in terms of what binds us together here. Christ is the center of who we are. He's the one that binds us, and he calls sinners and publicans to be part of his church and his domain. So we have to get outside of being squeezed, and we should make sure that as we go forward, that people feel comfortable, whoever they are, being here in our church. Let me just picture this to you. Could you envision in the future a Sunday morning at Faith Lutheran Church where we had in attendance on that Sunday not only all of us that have been coming here faithfully for all this time, but children. Children may be making noise and being somewhat destructive. That we would have to find a way through a children's sermon and through a children's ministry to care for these children. It would force us to expand our horizons. In addition to that, to see young people, young couples in our congregation. Young people now that are struggling with paying bills, paying mortgages, keeping their marriage together, and the rest of us here to support them. And how about even younger people than that? People sitting in the pews with tattoos. Not ones just that are hidden, but that we can see. Or somebody with purple hair. It won't be me, but wouldn't it be wonderful if there was somebody like that? I hope that you see that when we look at the words of Jesus, this is what he is saying to us. Expand the circle. Welcome the stranger. Include the other. We're all irregular verbs. They're all welcome here. So our text for our message this week, primary text, was Paul's letter to the 1 Corinthians. I'll read it to you and then I'll make a few comments about it. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 through 20. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, there is only one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we are all baptized into one body. There are no Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we are all made to drink of the one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of member. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make any less part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less the part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If you were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, but one body. This is the key now to being the church as we transform ourselves and move into the future. We need hands and eyes and ears and feet and everything else in between. Different from each other, with a different role and with a different function, but all part of the one body. So, our text from today, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and they were having somewhat of a problem in the 12th chapter. Some of their members felt that they had a more ecstatic, a more spiritual, emotional experience of their relationship and their faith, and they felt that they were the better Christians. Paul now had to address that question. He said, you're confusing intensity with quality. He wrote, is it true that some people are more Christian than others? He said, no, we're all one body in Christ. Each part is different, but important part of the unity. Just as different organs perform different jobs, the body is one. And the organism is only as strong as each of the parts. So this is the message to us in the church. We need to be unique, recognize that we're irregular verbs, but we also need to be united. United in spite of our differences. And that Christ is the one that draws us together. This is why this deepening relationship of God and in what Jesus' words speak to us will allow us to welcome that. I've been talking to you about bumper sticker religion the last few weeks. I said the bumper sticker of, it's not about the religion, it's about the relationship. Well, how about this one? We are a close-knit gathering of irregular verbs. Unique, but yet united. That's what we should be, and we should welcome it. Children, elderly, purple hair, tattoos, the whole enchilada should be welcome here in this place, and we should be part of it. Now, timing. I know timing is critical. If you push too fast, things get off the rails. If you go too slow, you're constantly talking about the same agenda over and over again. Let me just close my thoughts with you today with these words. Many years ago, I pastored a church in Iowa. And if you know anything about Iowa, there's a lot of corn in Iowa and a lot of cornfields in Iowa. This is a tragic story about a small child that is lost in the vast cornfields, and about a small community now that gathers together 200 or 300 families and friends and law enforcement people to search all over the cornfields. And they do for 2 days, and they cannot find the child. And then somebody suggests, why don't we join hands together and march through the cornfield? So these 200 or 300 people now joined hands, formed a single column, and marched through the fields. And within a couple of hours, they found the child. But it was too late. Tragic. Horrifying. Later, the grieving mother would say, why didn't we join hands sooner? I think the time is now, friends, for us to join hands in this church and march into this community as a single column and find those that are lost, those that are seeking, those that are in need, regardless of where they come from. But just be the church as Christ would be the church. I think that's what God is calling us to do right now. In this broken world, it's time for us to join hands. The word that from the very beginning, it's a Greek word, that has always defined the church was koinonia. 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 But it is translated in English as being community. But it's not just a pleasant environment, a community. This koinonia is a command from God. A command from God to form a community that crosses boundaries, that is inclusive, that welcomes others, that expands the table. That's our call for this time. This is the time of preparation now, in which we are equipping ourselves to be that church. So let your spirits be moved by these messages. Look closely at the scriptures that we use today. Follow these themes that we have been talking about and see if God doesn't speak to your life so that you can say yes. And when we come back together again, we can, as a koinonia, as a community of Christ, now move forward courageously, purposefully, welcoming. God grant that your lives are touched by these messages. God grant that the Spirit is alive in your life. We'll keep praying for each other as we do all of the time, and we look forward to the time when we can be back together again and be about God's business right here and right now. God bless you all, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye for now.